What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be taking another sneak peek into my newest book, Gone: Mysterious Disappearances, Volume 3, and at the time you're watching this, you can find the link in the description box to purchase this brand new book or information about how to get signed copies. We are going to be discussing the Dyatlov Pass incident. The Dyatlov Pass incident is one of the most bizarre and flat-out terrifying mysteries of the modern world. I don't say that lightly or in jest either, and once you finish this chapter, you'll understand what I'm talking about. There are no disappearances in this story, but there's a good reason I've decided to include it in this book, and that's because what happened to these poor mountaineers is so incredibly horrific, extraordinarily bizarre, and still completely and totally unsolved. I personally believe I know some of the answers, but you'll find those out at the end, so bear with me. On January 25th, 1959, 23-year-old ski instructor Igor Dyatlov, for whom the now notorious pass would eventually be named, led an excursion that included 3 engineers, 7 students from the former Soviet Union's Polytechnic Institute, which is located in the city which was known then as Sverdlovsk. Now, side note, I'm reading from the book, and also I don't speak any other languages except American Sign Language, so I'm not good at pronouncing the Russian. All right, reading from the book. The group boarded a train and embarked on a very strenuous cross-country skiing expedition into the Otorten mountain range, which is nestled inside of the northern Urals. Igor Dyatlov had assembled a talented team of male and female skiers for what they considered to be a training exercise for a future expedition that they all planned on taking into the treacherous and more complicated Arctic regions of that area. When the train stopped, the seasoned skiers got into a truck and headed towards what they would call their Alpine in the Urals. Before the ill-fated journey even began, while they were still in the small settlement of Vizhai, one of the team members, Yuri Yudin, got sick and was forced to remain behind. Vizhai was the very last outpost before the group reached the Otorten region. Yuri hugged his friends goodbye and enviously watched them leave together, happily and excitedly looking forward to what came next. No one had any way of knowing that he would end up being the lucky one. In fact, later on in life, Yuri claimed that there was something that has been haunting him throughout his life after everything that had happened up there in the mountains when he had to stay behind due to that illness. His biggest regret, he said, is that he has never been able to figure out what the diabolical and blood-chilling force was that took the lives of his friends, and he sometimes wondered, why was he even saved from it? He would say, quote, "If I had a chance to ask God just one question, it would be, what really happened to my friends that night?" End quote. The rest of the group, the 9 athletes that were left, were engineers Rustem Slobodin, Georgy Krivonishenko, and Nicholas Thibault, and students Yuri Doroshenko, Zinaida Komologorova, Ludmila Dubinina, and their ski instructor and guide Alexander Zolotarov all followed Igor Dyatlov along the treacherous and grueling route towards their first destination. They were headed to the Gora Otorten mountain. It was January 28th, 1959, and the team would never make it to their destination, and not a single one of them would ever be seen alive again. But what happened to them? On February 11th, 1959, the Dyatlov ski team, as they were being referred to, never arrived in Vizhai as they were expected to. They were supposed to arrive there and send their families telegraphs announcing the success of their mission so far. However, when their family never received any telegrams, they didn't immediately panic. They knew that journeys like this one never went as expected, and that it was hard to keep to a schedule when you're at the mercy of your body and Mother Nature. There were any number of things that could have held them up from getting there on time, so at first, nobody panicked. Once no word had arrived to any family member from any one of the team members and a whole week had passed, that's when relatives and loved ones started demanding that the Ural Polytechnic Institute organize an immediate search and rescue operation. They figured surely if they hadn't arrived in that amount of time, something had gone at least a little bit wrong. To their credit, the Institute immediately did as they were told and got the search and rescue mission going. They had no idea what they were about to become a part of. Within just a few days, days, it became very clear that the Institute's initiative on the ground would not be able to garner any real results. The conditions were way too treacherous. They were forced to call in the military and civilian authorities to get involved in the search. Military planes and helicopters were swiftly dispatched to the area on February 25th, and one of the pilots spotted something strange on the mountainside below them. The next day, on the 26th, the search party, which included a fellow student of the Polytechnic Institute named Mikhail Sharavin, made their way up to the abandoned encampment on the eastern slope of a mountain that's only listed as 1709. This apprehensive peak is better known to the indigenous tribes of the area, the Mansi tribesmen, as what translates in English to, quote, "do not go there," end quote. That is the name of the mountain as translated into English from the native tongue that all of this happened on. Do not go there. Some people say it's the mountain of the dead, but I'm confident in the facts that I received that it means do not go there. They never could have guessed how prophetic that name would turn out to be in this case. This is where they started finding what they were looking for, sort of, as I don't think for a second that anyone actually expected any of what they found. First, they came across a badly damaged tent and a whole lot of footprints that seemingly were made by at least 8 different people who had looked to be running to abandon that tent. Mikhail Sharavin would later describe the state of the tent the skiers had abandoned. He said, quote, "We discovered that the tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind," end quote. The very strange thing that these search and rescue people noticed right away was that these weren't any ordinary footprints that you would expect to see in a cold and snowy area. The tracks consisted of bare feet with socks on them and no shoes, and in one case someone had run away from the tent wearing only one single boot. 2 sets of the prints led down a slope towards a densely forested area, but the tracks had already been covered up by the snow within 1,500 feet of the tent. Mikhail followed the trail, and beneath an ancient pine looming somewhat ominously overhead, he found the remnants of a fire. He also found something much worse. Near the long-dead fire were the frozen remains of 2 of the team members. 23-year-old Georgy Krivonyshenko and 21-year-old Yuri Durashenko were dead, and the circumstances seemed very odd from the first look that was taken at them. Both men, despite being found well within range of that tent, were naked and shoeless. All they were wearing was their underwear. The investigators also quickly discovered that the branches of the old pine tree had been snapped off at up to a height of 15 feet. Later on, forensic tests would reveal traces of skin that were embedded into the bark of the tree. This indicated that the 2 men had attempted to frantically climb up into the tree, and they did so until their hands were nothing more than a pulpy, bloody mess, and the branches were snapping off as they held on and tried to get up as high into the tree as they could. They had literally held on for dear life. It was at this point that the searchers started to imagine and wonder what in the world would make these 2 grown men, both of whom were in great physical shape, so incredibly overwhelmed with terror that they abandoned the relative safety of the tent they were in to run off into the unimaginably cold night, barefoot and almost completely naked. It was incredibly confusing because everyone thought that they would have found evidence of an animal attack or something similar, but not only were there no tracks at all of any animals, but the men had clearly had time to stop and try to build a fire. So what the hell was going on here? We still don't know for sure. Not long after searchers found these 2 bodies, they came across the corpses of the team leader Igor Dyatlov 900 feet away from Georgy and Yuri. Igor was closer to the tent than the other 2, but had seemingly died under just as mysterious circumstances. Igor Dyatlov was found lying on his back with a hand clinging to an undersized birch tree branch, while the other hand was raised up over his face as though he had been trying to protect himself from some unknown and unimaginable assailant. Closer still to the tent was the body of Rustem Slobodin, and it was half buried in the snow, lying face down. His skull had a deep fracture, one that was nearly 7 inches long. Despite that fact, medical experts would later determine that he too had died of hypothermia, because they were saying that everyone thus far had died of hypothermia. Obviously, the volunteer and military search teams were baffled by everything that was happening at this time, including the alleged causes of death for the hikers. The body that was found the farthest away from the group was that of Zenaida Kolmogorov, and although there were traces of blood found all over her corpse, it's still unknown whether or not it was her blood. Although, if we're being honest, it's more than likely that it was her blood, right? One of the things that baffled and befuddled the searchers the most was the fact that in every case, with each and every strange circumstance surrounding how the bodies were all found up to that point, there had been no signs at all of a struggle with any outside force. So yes, the men were they were struggling with the branches, but they weren't struggling with each other. There was no signs that they were struggling with an animal or another person. There was no signs of foul play. The searchers continued in their efforts of finding the rest of the bodies, and by now they knew they were on a recovery mission, but a lengthy and drawn-out search for the others turned up nothing. The men at the site and all of the searchers just couldn't wrap their heads around why a group of very experienced skiers would make a mad dash more than half naked into the bitter cold forest in the pitch black of the night. What could inspire such terror? After inspecting the campsite and the rest of the strange evidence found, the confusion was only further compounded. Once the searchers inspected the severely damaged tent, they concluded that the material had been cut from the inside, as if the occupants had been running naked into the bitter cold darkness to escape something that had already been inside of it with them. This would have had to have been something so horrific and terrifying that taking the time to simply unclasp the tent wasn't seen as a viable option. Amidst the broken wood, shredded fabric, and other overall debris of the ravaged tent, the investigators found rolls of undeveloped film and the journals that had been kept by several of the members of the expedition, but none of it helped to shed any light on what really happened. After searching for 2 months without finding anything, the spring thaw would finally reveal the other corpses. The missing team members were located in a ravine approximately 225 feet from the ancient pine the other 2 members of the party had been clinging onto for dear life, or trying to. The 4 lost skiers were instructor Alexander Zolotaryov, engineer Nicholas Thibault-Brignolel, and students Alexander Kolvatov and Ludmila Dubinina. They were all discovered buried underneath 12 feet of snow and ice. All of them had apparently succumbed to absolutely brutal, and I mean brutal, guys, internal injuries, but unlike the others, these 4 were all fully dressed. Just like with Rustem Slobodin, Nicholas's head showed evidence of having been struck by an extremely heavy object. Zolotaryov and Dubinini's chests had been crushed inwards, causing massive internal damage and shattering several of their ribs. Just as with the others, though, there was no indication as to what could have possibly caused such severe trauma. Perhaps most bizarrely, those corpses showed no evidence of soft tissue damage or bruising. Dr. Boris Vozrohedny inspected the bodies, and he stated that the force with which these corpses were hit exceeded the capability of man. He said that the damage, quote, was equal to the effect of a car crash, end quote. So this isn't in the book, but let's talk about this for a minute, because you know I have to say something. This means that there's no way possible that a man caused the injuries to these 4. The internal injuries were like the impact of a car crash. Just let that sit for a minute. Ludmila's head was tilted back with her mouth stuck in a perpetual silent scream, and this horrified the searchers as it seemingly made everything even more gruesome and strange. As they got closer to her face, perhaps thinking to close her eyes or close her mouth, they noticed that, quite horrifically, her tongue had been ripped out by the root. They also saw that at some point these 4, the last 2 were found, had taken some of the clothes from those who had perished before them. Meaning they had seen everything that had happened to the others before they themselves met their own demise. Presumably so, at least. However, they couldn't be sure if this was the case of all of them trying to dress very quickly inside of the tent that obviously had something inside of it with them that they were desperate to escape from, or if they had scavenged clothing items off of their dead teammates. Either way, it's terrifying to think about. During the funerals that came after the discovery of the bodies, many of the family members would remark that their loved one's skin had a strange and somewhat orange tint to it. Somewhat more disturbingly, most of them had gray hair by the time they were buried, as whatever they encountered on their last night alive had so terrified them that their hair had lost all of its pigmentation. Skeptics still claim that the orange tint was due to the prolonged exposure to the elements, and they flat out deny that anyone's hair had turned gray or lost its color. However, most people take the word of the bereaved relatives who otherwise wouldn't have taken the time in their grief to comment on such things if they weren't true. To add to this already bizarre case, some of the clothing the victims were wearing that night on the night they died were measured as emitting higher than normal levels of radiation. All of the mysterious and horrifying elements to this case, along with the experience and youth of the victims, sent the Soviet investigators into overdrive. Like, they needed to know what was going on. This was a tourist spot. They were on a mission to find out what happened out there, or some would say they were on a mission to find something to blame it on that enough people would believe. The first thing they did was try to reconstruct the series of events that led to the shocking demise of the ski team. They decided to read through the journals found at the scene, and they developed the film they found out there as well. One of the main mysteries for them was, why would the team choose to make camp on an exposed mountain face when there was the option of a detour less than a mile away that would have afforded them some much needed shelter from the harsh Russian elements? The most probable answer would come from the only team member who survived, the one who pulled out begrudgingly at the last minute due to an illness, Yuri Eufimovich Yudin. He stated, quote, Dyatlov probably didn't want to lose the distance they had covered, or he decided to practice camping on the mountain slope, end quote. The photos revealed that the team had set up camp on February 2nd at around 5 that night. They did so on the slope of Kholat Syakhl in order to escape the elements a little bit and get out of the inclement weather. The group had cleared the tree line and were only 10 miles from the first destination of their long trek to Gora Otorten. In the photos from that night, they all looked happy and like they were having a great time. At around 7 that same night, they ate dinner, and not too long after that, they all started to get settled in for the night. The temperature on that slope was less than 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which is one of the reasons no one can ever understand why they were all in various stages of undress when they were found. At this point, everything seemed relatively normal, and all was seemingly going well for the group. Forensic pathologists have come up with an estimated timeline between 9:30 and 11:30 that same night for whatever happened to disturb the peace of the group, and it's all a mystery from there. They came to that conclusion based on the undigested food in the stomach of the victims. What follows is the best estimation of what happened to these poor young people that the military investigators were able to piece together from the strange evidence that they had. Then I move on to part 2. So this would be part 1 in the book, and then I did it as 2 parts because it was super duper long, and these are supposed to be like shorter stories. So here's part 2. In part 1, we left off when the military investigators got involved in trying to figure out what in the world could have happened to this group of young people. No one could understand it, and not only were the clues not adding up as they were, but they also weren't making sense when investigators were trying to piece them together. Here is the best estimation of what happened to the hikers based on the military's investigation and what they were able to put together. Investigators speculated that sometime before midnight on February 2nd, the skiers were frightened by, quote, an unknown event, end quote. Members of the team somehow cut or ripped through the fabric of the tent in a very frantic attempt to escape whatever was either attacking them or approaching them at that time. In their haste, they seemingly burst through the tent completely in various states of undress, in a state of sheer panic, and not thinking about the icy temperatures they were exposing themselves and their bodies to. This was a group of experienced skiers and mountaineers, all right? And they would have known that they wouldn't have been able to last very long out there with the weather how it was without some sort of protection from the bitter cold. Because of this, the investigators knew that those hikers had to have been convinced that they had no choice but to expose themselves like that in order to escape some mortal and definite peril. They opted, instead of facing whatever this was, to run for their lives and hope and pray for the best. The tracks in the snow, which were mainly bare feet, showed that the group had initially scrambled in all different directions, but that they did somehow manage to rejoin one another down the incline about 900 feet away from the tent, which was by then shredded. Investigators then deduced that the group must have huddled together underneath the ancient pine tree where the bodies of Doroshenko and Krivonischenko were eventually found, and which they had both tried so desperately to either hold onto or climb. At this point, the investigators speculated that the teammates attempted to share clothes in order to try and make it so that they were all as comfortable and as warm as possible. Just a side note, they were all in such states of undress that it's actually very unlikely that, while alive, they all switched clothes with one another. The evidence does suggest that the group was absolutely terrified for some unknown reason to return to the tent, and they managed to gather enough kindling to at least try and start a fire. The agents involved did make a good point when they wondered if the two men who attempted to climb the pine were doing so to escape this unknown threat, or if perhaps they were doing so in order to try and get a better vantage point to see if their tent, which was much higher up on the slope, was still under attack by the unknown phantom menace. It was theorized that sometime during the night, Doroshenko and Krivonischenko succumbed to exposure to the elements, and that's when the remaining team members decided that returning to the tent to face whatever was there, if it was still there, was a better option than dying from exposure like their two friends had. The four survivors, who were more than likely unimaginably terrified beyond anything a normal person is able to conceive, took the clothes from their now deceased comrades. I can only imagine that they also prayed for daylight. Investigators went on to hypothesize that, in fearing everyone else was already dead, Zolotaryov, Thibault, Brignolel, and Dubinina, so Thibault, Brignolel, and I know I'm not pronouncing that right, that's one person, and Dubinina moved closer to the forest, possibly in the hopes of finding some sort of makeshift shelter. It was sometime during that journey into the forest that they met their demise by descending into a nearby ravine and sustaining their own fatal injuries. Whether this is true or not, whether or not this is how it all really happened, understand that investigators still had no known cause for the injuries these people sustained or any obvious cause of death for any of them. Thibault Brignolel was the first to die, and within a few hours, Kolvatov and Dubinina met their fates as well. Zolotarev would be the last of them to die, and he also died of a combination of hypothermia and internal trauma. It's still unknown if Dubinina's tongue being ripped out by the root happened after she died, or if it somehow contributed to her death in the first place. Less than 8 hours after the initial event, whatever it was, the final survivor would perish and the event would be over. As with everything else surrounding this case, the discovery of the campsite and all of the bodies has left everyone with more questions than answers. The most important question here, at least in my opinion, is what happened? What happened? The timeline the investigators put together was reasonable enough, but it answered no questions about why any of this happened in the first place. What in the world could have terrified these athlete caliber skiers so badly that they would rather have freeze to death than confront it? Also, what in the world, or outside of it, could have possibly caused the injuries on some of those bodies? Despite how popular this region was, it was closed down to skiers, hikers, and outdoorsmen in general for 3 whole years after this event occurred. This was probably to make sure that whatever happened to the victims didn't happen to anyone else, even though no one really knows what it is that happened. At first, it seemed as though the authorities took this case as seriously as everyone else was, but after a few months of nothing but dead-end leads, failures, and disappointments, the case was closed and the files were sent to what many believe was a clandestine Soviet archive. The final official determination of what happened to the skiers in Dyatlov Pass would be that they fell victim to, quote, a compelling unknown force, end quote, which in actuality explains nothing and leaves it all open to nothing but the usual speculation and theories. At least that's what you would think, but in this case some of the theories were anything but ordinary, and what I believe happened is out of the realm of the usual as well, of course. Let's briefly go over a few of the main theories of the case and talk about what I think at the end. The first is that the group fell victim to some of the local Mansi tribesmen after unintentionally running afoul of them. Did they accidentally trespass into the Mansi territory and leave the natives no choice but to take matters into their own hands and get rid of them? This might make sense to some, but from what I understand, the Mansi are an extremely peaceful people, and their tribes are not known for attacking people under really any circumstances. There are those who claim the Mansi are legendarily harsh, so I don't really know for sure, but from what I gather and understand, I've come to the belief that they're peaceful. However, I can say with some certainty that human beings in general, including the Mansi tribesmen, had nothing to do with this case, aside from maybe in some roundabout way. Also, the military investigators very quickly went to work dispelling those rumors and insisted that the damage done to the corpses was inconsistent with any sort of attack by human beings. Let's clear the air about this right now. There were no extra footprints or unknown footprints at all in the area. There were no bullet wounds or bullets found anywhere on the scene. The group's things and provisions were all left completely untouched and hadn't been gone through or scavenged in any way. And all of these things combined, in my opinion, leaves really no room for doubt that the Aboriginal tribesmen were innocent. Human beings couldn't have caused the injuries, and human beings wouldn't have been able to cover up their tracks, so to speak, so swiftly and easily had they been present. It's just not possible. The Mansi also assisted in the hunt for the missing hikers, and the evidence simply doesn't work with this hypothesis. So let's move on. I recently came across a documentary that put everything that happened during this incident into perspective, at least for me. I'll try to explain it as best I can because it has me convinced that this mystery has finally been solved, but that most people don't want to deal with the truth of it all. What if the hikers somehow knew something was out there lurking in the woods and possibly following them around the whole time they were up there? From the photographs, when put in the order that they were taken, it seemed like the group went from very happily being on an expedition to being somewhat frightened of something out in the woods. I say that because suddenly the photos were no longer of the smiling faces of the group members, but seemingly very random and very dark shots of the woods surrounding them instead. Is it possible that Igor Dyatlov chose that strange spot for them to spend the night, not because he didn't want to lose any ground, but because it was somewhat more out in the open and further away from the tree line? I think that's very possible. One of the photos has become a cause of contention since it was revealed, and that's photo 17. Photo 17 is a photo of what looks like some sort of Bigfoot or Yeti creature. Yes, there are skeptics who say it could be one of the group members wearing a lot of clothing and all bundled up, but I want you to assume it's a Yeti and follow me as I tell you exactly what I believe happened out there. What if the group somehow knew or saw that something inhuman was watching them from the woods and were terrified immediately of whatever it was? We all know in this community that Bigfoots are able to use infrasound to paralyze its victims or even to harm them in other ways as well. Now, keep in mind that the North American Bigfoot and the Russian Yeti, while related, are two completely separate cryptids, all right? Many people who lived in the region reported seeing strange lights in the sky the night the campers died, and they also reported hearing strange noises as well. The theory I am getting behind is a complicated one, and I'm only going to give you an overview here as I do. What if the Russian government were trying, as they did during World War II, to capture Yetis and turn them into super soldiers for war? There was a military base, probably more than one, even if there's only one that's known, in the area where the hikers perished. What if the lights in the sky and the strange sounds filling the air were set off by military agents so that they could provoke the Yetis in the woods and lead them to feel like they were under attack, thereby attacking the humans around them, the hikers? If that were the case, then the injuries could actually be explained. Infrasound, as I mentioned earlier, is a tool Bigfoot creatures are known to use, and if they use it in a certain way, then they could easily blow a human's head and body up from the inside out, eyes popping out of the skull, ears bleeding, and an overall sense of the skull being crushed as though it were in a vice would all be features of infrasound, if used in that way. Also, Yetis are massive as they are, so imagine when they're compared to human beings. Regardless of how large a human is, they wouldn't even come close to measuring up to a Bigfoot or a Russian Yeti, as is evidenced, in my opinion, by photograph 17. The crushing of the body as though it were in a high-impact crash, the removal of the tongue by the root, all of those things would be simple for a gigantic and irritated Yeti to carry out on helpless and much smaller, weaker human beings. Not to mention, these hikers would not have been as familiar with or comfortable in the forests of the Urals as the Yetis obviously would have been. That's where they live after all, and I believe they were purposely irritated by the government and or the military to lure them out of the woods to see what they're capable of when provoked. There's a whole other side plot here that I learned about in the documentary I watched, where the outsider, one of the men who was much older and didn't go to school with the team, but who had joined at the last minute, was also in on it. He was said to have been sent as some sort of security who would report back to the Russian government about anything strange he saw in the woods out there or with the others in the group. No one in the group trusted him. He was found deceased in possession of 2 very expensive cameras. Now, back in the 50s when all this happened, it would have been highly unusual for someone of this man's status and background to have 1 camera worth several $1,000s, but this man was found with 2. His brother had been killed by some mob members not too long before the expedition, and many who believe in this theory believe that he was forced into this to try and make up for whatever his brother had done to betray the mafia over in that area, but that whoever sent him in knew he would just die anyway, so he was like collateral damage. Guys, I didn't put this in the book, but watch, I believe it's called Yeti Massacre. It's on the Investigation Discovery app, okay? It's still streaming as of when I'm doing this video. Watch it, please. It explains Dyatlov Pass. In my opinion, completely solved. Completely solved. This man is the one who's thought to have taken photograph 17, and I'm all but certain he knew what was going on the whole time, but that he never expected to die out there. This man was Semyon Zolotaryov, and he was definitely an outsider. He was a World War II veteran and much older than the other members of the group at 37. He had tattoos and a mustache, which even visually set him apart from everyone else. No one in the group knew him, and the only information that I could find was that Igor Dyatlov was informed at the very last minute that another person had to join them. This person was joining them. There was no argument about it. The photograph shows Semyon laughing and horsing around with the rest of the group, but it said that this would have been strange for the others to have this random stranger just pushed into their close-knit group at the last minute and with no real reason as to why he needed to join them given. But they just went with it, as most young people in this situation would have. If you're wondering why I haven't mentioned this man before, I have actually, just that he had more than one name that he used, and for the trip he used the name Alexander Zolotaryov. Many believe this man held the key to what happened out there, but that he took everything he knew to the grave with him. There's one thing I thought of almost immediately upon reviewing this case, and the documentary backed it up for me, and I'll share that all with you now. When I thought of this group inside of the tent, ripping it apart from the inside out, I couldn't understand why would they do such a thing. This was their only safe place and the only sense of warmth they had out there. I thought that until I saw where the tent had initially been ripped. There had been a slit placed in it at what would have been eye level to almost everyone in there had they been sitting down. They were peeking out into the darkness of the freezing cold night at something they knew was out there, but that possibly they couldn't see or keep their eyes on. I absolutely believe 100% without a doubt that a Yeti or several of them are what caused the incident at Dyatlov Pass so long ago. And whether or not the government was in on it, I have no idea and don't really even know if that's relevant. I don't think that this case will ever truly be solved because no one wants to accept the actual reality of the situation, and until people in charge or the powers that be are willing to accept that cryptids are real and that they do attack, and in this case did so, and in so many other cases, we have no shot at anything close to clarity or to solving many strange cases that no one ever gets any closure about. We've got a long way to go, but that's why I'm hoping this book will at least lead to the starting of many conversations that up until this point, no one ever wanted to have. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed watching, if you enjoyed the content, and if you enjoyed hanging out and spending this time with me. The link for Gone, Mysterious Disappearances Volume 3, where this two-part story came from, will be in the description box. Let's get its number 1. If you want autographed copies, email me for any correspondence. Email me for anything y'all need, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. So also the books Gone, Mysterious Disappearances Volume 1, Volume 2, my Campfire Stories Volume 1 and Volume 2, Missing the Fae Theory, Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories, Shadow Entities, Sleep Paralysis and Beyond, Danger at Your Door, Terrifying Encounters with the Black-Eyed Kids, and Midnight Visitors, the companion book to Danger at Your Door. Midnight Visitors is just Black-Eyed Kids encounters. All right, I'm really excited about all of my books. The Danger at Your Door was definitely the one most people are interested in, but I think these ones are doing really well as well. So pick up your copy if you want it signed, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Be sure and let me know before you make the purchase if you would like a signed copy. Also in the description box, you'll find details about the intuitive oracle readings that I do and things that I sell. I'm getting a website. It's going to more than likely be Gemma Jade Paranormal, but again, it's just me. I have no one helping me. I have no money to pay anyone to help me, so I'm going to do it myself. Give me a little bit of time on that, but if you have questions about the spiritual helper boxes that I custom create depending on what your spiritual issue or kind of your spiritual wish list is, what you need spiritually, I custom make the boxes for you. But I also sell just the sprays. I sell small, medium, large, and extra large boxes at all different prices. I do video readings for an hour to an hour and a half. I do general remotes where you don't even have to be there and you just have to send the money for the reading. Donations, guys, please, please, please donate. PayPal, Cash App. My Amazon wish list gift link, become a member. and or a patron, and you will get a free reading every single month. For the members, it's 2 that I pick out of a hat. For the patrons, it just comes every month if you donate $20 a month or more, if that's what you pledge. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're amazing, you're beautiful. Abundance is your birthright, and I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace, smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time.